it goes back to that Cohen quote: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life, and you will call it fate. If you decide that you're not worthy of the very best, that will rule your life, and it will become your fate.
It's good.
It's not preordained. It doesn't have to be that way in any way, shape, or form. You can change it anytime you like. But until you make that unconscious belief conscious and shift it, it will be the outcome you experience. So a lot of when I'm working with people, they'll say, I'm the kind of person who, or these kind of things don't happen to someone like me, or this is what always happens to me. And I'm always going, well, so it happens because of whether you understand it or not, because of the choices and behaviors that you've made unconsciously. When we shift the starting point of that, you'll make very different choices naturally, and that pattern will fall away, and you'll suddenly have a very different outcome. And people can't believe how quickly it can happen, but it really can, because our minds are extraordinarily powerful in terms of how that fundamental belief will filter out into all those myriad of choices and interactions that we have every day.
Andrew, it is fantastic to have you on. The few conversations that we've been able to have been extremely valuable, and I'm just super excited to have your content exposed to folks who may listen to this podcast. So as everybody knows, the life we're dreaming of is going to be built through the connections that we make. And this is true both personally and professionally. And every once in a while, we're able to have on content that talks about the dynamics of building relationship and making connections, and the preparation for doing those. And so I have Andrew Leedham, the author of Unstoppable Self-Confidence, one of the top ranked books on personal development and self-confidence. And Andrew has a massive following on social media. The content is specifically around the tenets of self-confidence and enabling people to achieve their goals, create success on demand, and live life on their terms. So Andrew, thanks so much for taking the time to have this conversation.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here. Really looking forward to it.
So, what prompted the and honestly, if you want to share, kind of a bumper sticker on the book, I gave a little bit. I'd love to have you do that, and then share what prompted you to write it.
Sure. So, I wrote the book probably about 2 years ago now, and I've been through probably kind of the most difficult time of my own life, where I'd been going through a very difficult divorce, faced losing everything kind of financially, losing my family, losing my home. It was a very, very difficult time. But more importantly than all the sort of the outside things that were feeling like they were falling apart, I just felt like I'd completely lost myself as someone who'd always felt, pretty confident, pretty happy with who they were. Inside, I just felt totally lost. And as we'd gone through sort of the last stages of our marriage, we'd gone to see a number of therapists. And I remember saying to one amazing coach that I worked with that if everything they told me about me was true, that I simply didn't have enough time left in my life to fix all the things. That if I literally just added them all up, I was kind of going, well, all I've got available to me is a lot of hard work to be slightly less screwed up than I feel like I am now. And so it literally, whatever's beneath rock bottom, that's kind of where I felt. So I found myself in my sort of early 40s, kind of going, what the hell does life look like now, and who am I? Who am I outside of this life that I've built previously? And I just felt like at an all-time low. I felt totally lost, didn't know where I was going with my life, didn't know who I was. Felt really anxious, desperate, lost. You pretty much named the bad feeling. I pretty much had it most of the time. And I started working with two brilliant mentors who really helped me turn my life around incredibly fast. I mean, it still takes my breath away just how quickly. And I remember walking into the office of my coach, Stephen, who's a really remarkable guy, and just spilling out all of this, everything that was going on, going, literally, what the hell do I do with my life now? Literally everything that made up my life is kind of disappearing out the door fast. And I remember saying to him all the stuff about, all the things that I think are wrong with me, all the labels that I've been given. And he just smiled at me and said, there's nothing wrong with you. you're not broken, and you don't need fixing, and you never did. You've just simply forgotten who you are. And so the journey back is actually quite straightforward, and it will happen far quicker than you might imagine. And he said, within 6 weeks, you'll start to not recognize yourself. Within 3 months, no one else will recognize you either. And he was completely right. And that was, that was exactly the journey I experienced after about 6 weeks. And bear in mind, I still had all the challenges of the divorce and the legal bills, etc., ahead of me. I had this sense that I just knew I was okay, and I knew I would be okay, no matter what. And after 3 months, I had people look at me going, how the hell are you staying quite so calm, and your life's kind of falling apart as you do this? Because it still was. But it was because I'd learned a completely different set of mindsets, a completely different way of thinking, a whole different way of thinking than I'd never really understood before. So working with Stephen and my other mentor, Andy Shaw, they both taught me an incredible series of teachings and ideas and steps that really transformed the way I saw myself, saw my place in the world incredibly fast. So within 3 months, I felt calm in a way that I hadn't felt for years. I knew that I could create life pretty much in the ways that, whatever ways I wanted to. And that I just knew I'd be okay. And it was understanding that the journey to kind of confidence and success was entirely different to the one that I had been taught, and the one that's taught in most self-development books. That the most self-development really starts from some kind of premise that you have to be someone that you're not in some way. You have to kind of go away, that who you are is in some way inadequate, and you have to go and become one of these amazing people, one of the 1%. Whereas what Andy and Stephen taught me was that no, that's genuinely not the case at all. That you were born naturally successful and confident. You were born with everything you needed, and you still have within you everything you need to be that amazing person. But that you've just been taught as you grow up a series of ways of thinking, a series of steps that just makes you less than you are. So one of my other friends, a guy called Richard Wilkins, says we're all superheroes pretending to be ordinary people, which is a really good way of capturing that everyone's natural potential is up here. But as we get taught all these things, that just limits that potential a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And as we take on board and integrate those ways of thinking, we come to believe that's who we are. And so we operate in alignment with that. And so the book really takes people on that journey, the same kind of journey that I went on, where I show you the truth about who you are. I show you how to strip away those limiting beliefs. I then show you how to reconnect with the mindsets that plug you back into who you really are fully, but also really importantly, keep you there, so that no matter what happens, no matter what challenges come up, you have the right ways of thinking, you have the structured thinking that allows you to process those things. So instead of kind of falling over, you become completely unshakable. And then the last bit of the book is that I teach you then how to use that wonderful new power that you've got to go and create the life that you want, go and become the person you want to be, and create the life you want to live.
It's good stuff, Andrew. What are your thoughts? If you were talking to a guy who I don't remember the guy's name, but someone who's read books like The Alter Ego and some of the kind of stepping into this persona that you think needs to be the persona to help you achieve your goals. What's your take on that?
So this is the kind of fake it till you make it approach.
Yeah.
I really don't like the fake it till you make it approach for a whole heap of reasons. So one is I think it's completely unnecessary, because faking it means that you kind of have to pretend to be someone you're not, whereas actually the truth about who you are is way more powerful than the version of you that you might fake. So you're still going on the wrong journey in a different direction. The second part is that a huge part of confidence is real confidence is about knowing, liking, and loving who you are. So that if you're faking who you are in whatever way, or at least you feel like you're faking who you are because you're adopting that approach, you're putting on a different mask, you're putting on a different pretense about who you are. You know you're operating out of some kind of integrity. You know you're still pretending to be someone you're not. You're not being the real and authentic you. And so that's going to feel pretty wrong in some way on the inside to you, and it's going to feel pretty incongruous and out of shape with the people that you talk to. What I would say is that once you actually learn the truth about who you are, the truth is way more powerful than any fake it and make it approach. If and when you understand the truth about who you are, then you can suddenly connect with the power that was always within you, and you don't need to fake anything, and you'll be able to go and achieve a huge amount more. That faking it is literally saying the person who I am is still in some way not adequate enough, not good enough, when that's not true. That's still a journey away from real confidence. That's a journey into pretend confidence for a short period of time. And it's going to require a huge amount of effort to sustain because you're not operating authentically. Whereas to my mind, true confidence comes, as I said, from knowing, liking and loving who you are, so that you walk in and you have that sense and you have that energy going into every situation. And it's easy to maintain because you're just being the real you.
Is there any pithy or initial steps someone might want to take to take that? They should read your book, but
well, a lot of it is first of all, it's starting to realize the truth that for 99% of people, who they think they are is actually way less than who they really are and who they're capable of. So once you start to recognize that for 99% of people, most people are holding themselves back in some way. And one of my all-time favorite quotes, in fact, probably the most powerful quote I've heard, is one from Carl Jung. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." I'll say that again because it's really important. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. Now, when I'm working with people, what I'm doing when I'm first talking to them is I'm listening really carefully to the stories that I can hear that they've said to themselves about themselves. That nearly always they've interpreted what's happened to them or who they are in a very different way to the story that I'm hearing. So I always say there's the events that happened, there's our story about the events that happened, and then there's the meaning that we apply to that based on our interpretation of that event. I'll give you a personal example. I had one of my stories for about 20 years was that the women who I truly loved didn't stay with me. Now, it wasn't the people that I loved walked away from me, just the women that I truly loved. And so off the back of that, I adopted all kinds of unhelpful behaviours in those relationships. And when I was working with Stephen, he was kind of getting me to talk through it, where he was showing me that that story was fundamentally wrong. A lot of it was premised on one particular girlfriend I'd had when I was younger. And he basically showed me how not only had she not kind of walked away from me in the way that I had told myself that story, but that she stayed with me despite some things that I hadn't understood as destructive behaviours at the time. And so when I realised that truth, that story completely shattered for me. And I went from then searching for that sense of the expectation that those women would leave me to actually recognising that story was wrong. So I expected them to, like, love and cherish me. And so guess what happened? That story and that experience and those relationships changed very fast. So really the process is about becoming the observer of our thoughts as opposed to the judger of our thoughts. All change starts with becoming the non-judgmental observer of ourselves. So every time a thought comes up that makes you feel bad or feel less, you have to start to sort of slow down your mind and look at it and go, is this really true? So separate out the truth of the story of the actual events that happened from the story that you've told yourself, from the meaning that you've said about this means that I'm the kind of person who, right? So in my context, I'd actually had one girlfriend who, after me doing a series of destructive things that I hadn't realised, had decided to end our relationship. My story about that became every woman that I love leaves me. The meaning I applied to that about me was that in some way I'm inadequate and unlovable. Right? That's the kind of chain of logic. When you go back to the start of that story, you realise that the foundation stone of that chain of logic wasn't true. And so then the story changes, and then you're free to make very different. You start to see yourself in very different ways, and you're free to go down very different paths. You suddenly realise it's a piece of baggage that you're letting go. It's another one of these anchors that holds us all back that we're able to let go.
How critical is it to have an outside voice or outside eyeballs to help you to see some of those things? Is it something that you're able to parse that now by yourself? I mean, that our minds are pretty crafty.
Yeah, for sure. Largely yes, but I'm always conscious that you have to be very, very aware of what I call your ego, that negative voice in your head. As you said, it can get very, very cunning and very crafty and find all kinds of incredibly powerful and creative ways of tripping you up. So that's why it's very much about becoming that observer of your thoughts. The more you practice that, I keep 5% of my kind of conscious awareness always looking at my thoughts. Every time I'm starting to feel less good, I'm kind of observing my thoughts and going, what thoughts are causing me to feel that? At the beginning, it's certainly super helpful to have someone help you through that process. That's kind of why I do some of the work that I do. But the process that I lay out in my book and my programs gives you, a lot of the kind of common things that most people trip themselves up with. I show how to go through that process for things like the fear of failure, for dating in relationships, for feelings of rejection, for feelings of not being good enough. Those are the kind of the broad thematic areas that most people get trip themselves up in. There might be different flavors of those, but those are the kind of key ones. So at the start, it's definitely helpful to have someone be an objective outside voice, to recognize some of the bullshit that we all tell ourselves and recognize that it's not really true. But certainly my book and my program show you sort of the key areas that you can do that in.
Got a couple of different tracks I could go here.
Well, let me ask you, sorry, Dave, let me ask you a question first. So you and I have had a number of conversations about this. How do you feel you doing it now? How are you able to, because you certainly described a few times how you've started to do that process yourself.
Yes. Yeah, I think one of the things that I do is recognize that my mind exists apart from my being, and I can step back and observe my thoughts and then not necessarily believe them. Recognize that my eyes or my interpretations are just data. They're not synonymous with reality. And so I think the other part too is that recognizing that I can choose the thoughts that are helpful. Like not all. Okay, there's two different potential interpretations of this. Which one is going to help me most? And one of them might seem less plausible than the other, but if that's the one that's going to help me the most, that's the one I'm going to choose, right? So that's different and unique. And kind of my background is a very kind of religious, conservative upbringing, which I don't knock. It shaped some of the ways that I think, and some of the things that I learned, I now see as not necessarily the only way of looking at it, right? And so one of those would be the whole sense of guilt. Actually, it's funny. I remember, and I know we talked about this, but there was oh my gosh, there was a sermon on Sunday, and the title of it was Good Guilt. And I remember sitting there thinking to myself, we've got like a dozen pastors. Like, did this go through anybody's like chain of command? Did everybody check this one off, So I kind of squirmed through that whole thing because I didn't really agree with the premise of it. But like that is a very like, so when you hear it out loud, you're like, yeah, no. But like internally, I think a lot of people, especially from my background, would say there's something good about feeling bad. And I'd love to hear your because I've heard you talk about that's in the book. Could you share about that? Because I really think that's a big
It was a hugely powerful realization for me, to recognize one of the massive limiting beliefs, or one of the thought patterns that really sabotage a lot of people, is that to be a good person, you must regularly feel bad. That somehow the worse you feel, the better person you are. The more guilty you feel after you've done something, the better person you are. The more upset you are after something bad has happened, the better person you are. And realizing just how destructive and damaging that thought pattern was, that you start to take a look back and go, okay, so who's helped by it, right? Because the interpretation is, if you don't feel bad, in some way you're some kind of sociopath or psychopath, or there's something genuinely deeply wrong with you. But I always come back to who's helped by it. So let's say you do something where you hurt someone else by accident or by design. I'm not suggesting for a second that's a good thing, because it's not. I am saying, who is helped by you feeling bad? Who is helped, the person that you've hurt, are they helped specifically by you feeling bad? Are you yourself going to become wiser or better by feeling bad? Instead, what you can do is become more conscious, and it's a very different journey. So you kind of go, what was the process, or what was the thinking that got me to that stage of feeling like it was the right thing to do to hurt someone? I'm not suggesting that you don't go and do everything in your power to go and remediate the hurt that you may have caused. But that's different from accumulating over time more and more bad feelings, more and more things that you should feel guilty about, more and more things that make you feel like you're a terrible person because you've done all these things since you were a child. And it's this, as I said, it's this, when you stop and look at it, it's this crazy thought pattern that the idea is that to become a good person, you must feel bad, or as you said, good guilt, because that then causes you to accumulate more and more things to feel bad about, which makes you feel worse and worse about yourself. And in my experience, the people that feel worse about themselves tend to actually behave less well than the people that feel good about themselves, because they're so full of pain and self-destruction that they end up doing far worse things. Take an example. I give an example of where someone has cheated on a partner in marriage, right? Something that I think most people would intuitively say is a not great thing to do, right? A bad thing to do. Well, again, I'm not for a second suggesting that that's ever a good idea, because I don't think it is. I'm not suggesting that you should be proud of yourself and not care, because I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm saying you've now got a position where, particularly if you've got, say, kids in the marriage, where your highest priority is to remediate the damage that's been done and throw everything into trying to save that marriage on the assumption that that's what both parties would ideally like to achieve. So you have I was thinking about it like a pie chart. You have 100% of your energy. Now imagine that 50, 60, 70% of your energy in that situation is going into generating feelings of being bad, feeling guilty. Are you more likely to be able to save your marriage, and therefore the further hurt that could be caused to your partner and potentially to your children, by using most of your energy on the guilty feelings? Or could you benefit them the most by switching all of that energy and focus to, how do I learn the lesson so that I don't do this again? How do I become the best possible partner for the rest of my time together with this person to create the strongest, most connected, most powerful relationship that we can? How can I become the best father or mother to my children? How can I become the most connected, wonderful, supportive partner there could be? Again, I'm not suggesting you don't have to face up to what's been done. I'm not suggesting that you don't have to remediate that hurt. I am suggesting that guilt is a roadblock to achieving that in the most powerful way possible, as opposed to helping you. That every time your energy is diverted away from becoming the best version of yourself that will contribute the most to those around you and those you love, to becoming the most conscious that you can be of the thought patterns that may have led you to do the destructive act, the more you're actually harming yourself, because you can only take on so much guilt before you start to push it away. It just becomes this big bubble that sort of sits there behind you. And because we've been taught, because that sense of we must, you must feel bad to become good starts for lots of people in, very early when they're young. They've already, by the time they've got to adults, are already filled with guilt and shame and hurt. As I said, in my experience, that causes far more destruction than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you feel as someone growing up with a lot of those feelings?
Oh goodness. The problem is like when the answer. So here's the thing, is the concept that you need to feel guilty in order to get better. Like that's I think the paradigm, right? That's why guilt is good. Like that's where that paradigm puts people on the wrong track. And
replace it with consciousness. Why don't, if I always sit there going, it's not a yes or no, right? It's not a, people misunderstand the journey. It's not a feel guilty or feel not guilty, right? That's, or at least in that binary sense, it's about being conscious, right? So replace the word good guilt with good consciousness, right?
Aware.
Imagine just being really aware and really conscious and really learning the lessons and really kind of integrating all of that. That is absolutely the journey to becoming a better person. I would say the distinction between confidence and arrogance is consciousness, right? Arrogant people are unconscious about their flaws and the things that are less good at them. Confident people are totally aware of their flaws. I'm as flawed as any person out there, right? But it doesn't mean that I dislike myself because of my flaws. I'm aware of them and I become conscious of them and I work to become the best version of myself that I can every day. It's the same with it's the same with when people talk about guilt. If you simply replace it with consciousness, it's a very different journey, a very different feeling, and one that actually contributes as much as possible to the world. When I look at my my daughters, and I'm sure you have the same with yours, that when they do something where they make a mistake, are they served by feeling terrible about it?
Yeah.
They're young children finding their way in the world. When they make a mistake, when they get a bit cross with their sister, when they do something slightly mean or whatever, what I say to them is, when they do it wrong, you need to go and apologize because you did create some harm. You need to recognize what caused you to do that, and then you need to take the lesson from that. I don't need you to feel bad. No one's helped. Your sister isn't helped. I'm not helped. You're not helped by feeling bad. But we're all massively helped by you taking the lesson and leaving the baggage behind.
That's good. I was going to say, when you have guilt as a tool, I mean, that is just a recipe for a train wreck, because everything becomes something you can feel bad about. And
and you'll take on loads of guilt because it's the path, because you've been taught it's the path to being a good person. So that if you don't take on the guilt, you're on the path to becoming a bad person.
Yeah.
And so, then you'll literally end up harvesting as much guilt as possible, so it's not, and again, as you said, that crowds out the lesson and crowds in the bad feelings. And so you've actually become, to go back to my previous point, you've actually become less conscious, right? Because if your energy is focused on feeling bad as opposed to learning the lesson, you've actually become less conscious of the things that caused the problems in the first place. Like this, it's never pretending to be someone you're not. It's never hiding yourself away. It's never feeling guilty or shameful. It's being authentic and giving your genuine gifts to the world, because we all have them.
That's good. So you talk in the book about believing that you deserve good things in life. And it was really helpful to look at it through the paradigm of, like, you've got kids. Is there like any reason why you think that they don't deserve good, right? Can you talk about that? Just like the whole idea of deservedness.
We have again, it's one of those, go back to my Carl Jung quote, to make the unconscious conscious. One of many people's unconscious beliefs is that they have value, they have what I call functional value instead of inherent value. They are valuable because they earn money. They're valuable because they're good looking. They're valuable because they're good down the gym. They're valuable because they have achieved success in their career. Right? If your sense of value comes from function as opposed to inherently who you are, that sense that you deserve the best in life is always going to feel sort of slightly over there somewhere, because it means that it's something, it comes from something outside of you as opposed to something within you. And what I always talk about is that, as you said, it's great if you have kids because it becomes even more powerful, but it's true even if you don't. I always say, if you look at a young child of 3 or 4, that beautiful young child who's trying to find their way in the world and trying to kind of understand the world for the first time and kind of starting to integrate with it. I say, could you genuinely look at one of those young children and say to them, you don't deserve the very best in life, or you only deserve the very best in life if you go and achieve all these things, right? If you're not worthy unless you become, a straight A student. You're not worthy unless you're good looking enough. You're not worthy unless you're thin enough. You're not worthy unless you go and earn, crazy amounts of money or what have you, right? Can you genuinely look at that young child? I would say, picture that young child looking up at you and say, can you with real integrity say that child has no value unless they go and achieve those things? I said it to you about your daughters. Could you go and look at one of your daughters and say, you're not valuable for simply being you. You're valuable because of the functions that you provide. Now, most people instinctively feel that how wrong that is. Right. How wrong it is to look at a beautiful, innocent young child and say that, or feel that, or think. And then I say to them, but of course, you were once that young child. You were once that child that other people looked at in that way. And if you can't say it to that young child because you know it's a lie, if you're saying it to yourself, it's still a lie.
So good, yeah.
And so you can now, once you become conscious of that lie, you now have a very different choice in front of you. You can now consciously choose to continue to live in that lie. And I'll say that again because it's important. You can now consciously choose to continue to live within the lie, or you can consciously choose to live with a wonderful truth that you're already worthy and deserving of everything because of who you are, because you're Dave, because I'm Andrew, because someone else is whoever they are. Because that was the truth about you when you were a newborn child, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's the truth about you now. When you really slow down and think about it, when you really look at a young child like that and try to genuinely connect to the idea that they have no value unless they achieve, that they don't have inherent value themselves, it seems absurd. It seems genuinely and actually, offensive and a little bit upsetting. It's very hard to look at a young child and say that. And so you then have to genuinely try and process why that would be more true of you. What is it that's made you less worthy? At what age do you suddenly go from being worthy to unworthy, right? Is it 6? Is it 7? Is it 8? Look at your grandparents. Do they suddenly have no worth? So again, you can choose to continue to live in the lie, or you can embrace the wonderful truth that you deserve the very best for who you are. And the thing that bizarrely blocks us from getting lots of the very best is our belief that we don't deserve it. And so releasing that false limit, releasing that vicious cycle, because as I said, if the unconscious belief is I don't deserve the very best, we align with our self-perception. Our self-perception, one of the things I talk about in the book is that our perception is massively, way, 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 way more powerful than what most people think of as reality, because in practice, perception is reality for all of us, right? And we align, and by align I mean we make decisions, we make choices, we have behaviors that align with our self-perception, whether or not it's true. So if your self-perception is that you're not worthy or deserving of the best, then unconsciously you'll make decisions, you'll attract people, you'll connect with people, you'll make choices and behaviors that create that very outcome of you not getting the very best. And so now you think you're really not worthy of the very best, which reinforces the belief, which reinforces the behaviors, which creates the outcome, and so on and so on. Again, it's another infinity loop of doing, right? And so what we're doing is we're flipping, in the work that I do, we're flipping all those things to say, of course, you're worthy of the best for who you are, not because of what you do. You then start to expect the very best. That changes the way that you think, because our thoughts create our choices, which create our behaviors, which create our actions, which creates our life, right? So when you see yourself differently, you'll just naturally start to make different choices, as you've already started to experience. You naturally operate in different ways as you go into different contexts, as you've already experienced. And you start to see very different outcomes very powerfully and very quickly. And so over over a relatively short period of time, you start to get lots of really good stuff in your life because you expect it. So we've turned a vicious cycle into a virtuous cycle simply by changing the unconscious belief that sits beneath the surface for most people.
I'm glad you talked on that last topic, because that's super powerful.
And it goes back to that Cohen quote: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. If you decide that you're not worthy of the very best, that will rule your life and it will become your fate.
It's good.
It's not preordained. It doesn't have to be that way in any way, shape, or form. You can change it anytime you like. But until you make that unconscious belief conscious and shift it, it will be the outcome you experience. So a lot of when I'm working with people, they'll say, I'm the kind of person who, or these kind of things don't happen to someone like me, or this is what always happens to me. And I'm always going, well, so it happens because of whether you understand it or not, because of the choices and behaviors that you've made unconsciously. When we shift the starting point of that, you'll make very different choices naturally, and that pattern will fall away and you'll suddenly have a very different outcome. And people can't believe how quickly it can happen, but it really can, because our minds are extraordinarily powerful in terms of how that fundamental belief will filter out into all those myriad of choices and interactions that we have every day.
Fantastic. So everybody needs to get your book. What would you recommend? You have a few resources. What would you recommend for folks listening to this?
If they want a free starter, just something that doesn't cost them anything, they can go to my website, unstoppableselfconfidence.com, and in the top right hand corner they can sign up for my Upgrade Your Mindset free program. So just opt in and you get access to the full program, and that's the easiest way to start. Otherwise, if you're a book person, you can go and get my book on Amazon, Unstoppable Self-Confidence, and it's available there. But those are probably the two easiest ways to kind of start.
And definitely follow Andrew on Unstoppable Self-Confidence on Instagram. Really appreciate you, Andrew. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
Thanks, Dave. I really enjoyed it. It's been great talking to you.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.